First of all, my title changed, and I will show you that the only thing is, since the time is short, I can tell you where you can find things that I will avoid to tell you. For example, I'm not going in a debate of what if fundamentalism is the right word or is not, or the kind of problems that you can find about understanding between the concept of secularism and so on. Because I made a bit of effort of writing a book that you can find there, Understanding Muslim Identity Thinking Fundamentalism, is being published by Palgrave some time ago. You can just refer to that. So I can move directly to something new. Let me see if I found here. It should be full screen. Here you are. So what I'm interested in here today, we have discussed a lot about philosophy. We have discussed about a lot of macro structures. The reality is that groups, movements, political movements, and events are the results of people action. And when I speak people, I speak about individuals. And today I want to discuss about why so many young people from the Middle East to Western country feel so attracted about what is being called fundamentalist movement, Islamic movement, Islamist parties, or so on. They are all very different, but they have some point of commonality, and we're going to see which one. The reason is that this is something that's never been very much studied, but as a social anthropologist, of course, I spent time in trying to understand the reasons why these people felt so attracted by something that looked rather not successful if we listen to what is being told today. Even the Arab Revolution, both Libya or in Egypt or so on, seems to show, even when it appeared to be successful, to have serious problem when the system in place is organized by Islamic movements. So how the young people that we see that have this kind of visions handed in being involved, many of them, within a system that it look a bit complicated. Yes, thank you. I want to start from something to deny something. Gellner, as family stated, Muslim could have democracy or secularism, but not both. This seems a quite blunt statement from such a great anthropologist. They had a great idea of studying also nationalism and so on. But it seems, if you observe in general, can appear quite true. Every time there's a kind of democracy, you don't get the risk to lose secularism. Every time you have secularism, it seems you're going to lose democracy because you have dictatorship. Now, it's a very clever statement, as always Gellner used to do, but is flawed in many aspects. First of all, in the world, Muslim. And we can go on in this kind of idea that there is something that defines the Muslim mind. There is something that produces the Muslim. For example, some recent study, 2005, you see, if you read here, I'm not going into detail, that some people think there is a strong connection between textual, the Quran, the Hadith, the written things, and how people behave. Practically, the idea is a relation down between textuality and actual the psychological process of thinking or cognitive thinking. For example, Hood, for sure, seems to affirm our model simply assert that textuality, practically scripturalism, is a form of cognition controlled by a sacred text. So, of course, we have a very strong form of culturalism that we can find. In here, you find what is called the theory of a Muslim mind. The Muslims tend to think in the same way, so they tend to reproduce, like Gellner expected, similar social structures because of the way in which the text influence or plus or kind of form the cognitive formation of ideology. I can go on, and I will go on to look at all of them, but for example, Martin and Appleby, there have been very important study fundamentalism in different kinds of religions. Again, you find this strong element of relationship between, the idea of embodiment practically of a text Anthropologists have not done so much better. If you think Anton, although in a different kind of more sophisticated element, he go on to say cognitive affective orientation to the modern world, focusing on Protestant change, the fundamentalist protest and outrages against the ideology of modernism. This is the second point. Young people or people who join, we have seen groups or some because they hate modernism. They cannot accept the change of society. Now, this is contradictory to what happened in Egypt. Many of the people who support the Muslim Brotherhood, or even more extreme things, they want to change it. They wanted a very modern society, if you want to say so. Depend how you define modern. And there's another problem with studies that focus only on social changes. Some other scholars of the Middle East, like Milton Edwards, go so far to say that we might have one day a situation in which we have an Islamic party that become kind of democratic. The problem is, at the moment, we have not seen such development. So it goes back to the fact that we can only study, in my opinion, to a certain level. I don't say the abstraction of this kind of discourse is not important, but we need to add another level, is the level of the individual. The reason is because only, like K. Milton says, only individual learns, not groups, not political party. They are representation of different people acting towards certain things. But learning, the process of learning, can only be a process that can be done by people that have a brain. And of course, you can understand that groups often are not a collective brain, despite all what we want to say through textualism. The text can produce this kind of collective brain, something that is not being possible to demonstrate. So what produced this kind of perception of things is what often other scholars have indeed pointed, and I build on this, the idea that there are certain situations where young people have doubts, have questions, looking for coming out of a certain situation. This produced, in particular in case of difficult social condition, what is called cognitive opening. The possibility of finding new form of expression. And this often happens when there is a moral shock. And we will see again and again that the moral shock, in my case, in my study, becomes extremely important. Young people approach, in particular, for example, in the United Kingdom, in the West, Islamic movement or extreme even form of even para-violent movement because they had a kind of moral shock and rejection, of which 9/11, war in Iraq, and so on, and justice has had in particular important effect. And so we bring back to the concept of justice. We discussed about that. It's not an abstract concept. Justice, we're going to see, is linked to your emotions. Justice has a power on yourself. You want justice, you want dignity. Two concepts that are not abstract, but are related how you perceive the other and the other perceive you. So it's no imagination, no abstraction, it's everyday perception of feeling and perception of interaction with your environment. And definitely the concept of justice has a very powerful element if you go from Malaysia to, and much of a debate, of a political debate in Malaysia is about justice and equality, and the Middle East. The reasons why, because historically for a long time, I don't go in this, you can read the book From Colonialism to Change, even from the collapse of the caliphate, the perception, often also historically imagined, is of a big sense of injustice. And people suffer injustice in different kind of everyday life. Although the everyday life is different, it's easy to have a collective imagination of a collective injustice that we're going to see. So what we're going to have here is, we discussed before, is this kind of idea that is only through forbidding wrong, through opposing what is perceived wrong, that we can bring justice. But that is quite a real fact. The problem is how you define wrong, how you find wrong, how you define wrong. This is go back to the cognitive opening. Young people think so, don't know even, so have to discuss with others. And this kind is where actually the connection between individual and the network, the form, the cybernetic communication, the form, the kind of ideology of which I want to speak. one of the elements that is very important is the idea that justice is not just an abstract. You have to remember this before my point is coming next. I tend not to use the word fundamentalism. I wrote in this book, I tend to use a new form that's called emotional Islam. This is not that I want to be unrespectful for Islam. Emotions means that Islam is not mediated, contrary to what we expect, for these people often, not by theology. The majority of my informants that are part of radical groups don't know anything or very little about theology. If you go in Tahrir Square in Egypt, you start to interview people about theology, they don't know. They might repeat what they heard in the khutbah in the mosque, but the majority, like in Malaysia, they don't have deep theological knowledge. So why to discuss that at a level of study individual if that doesn't mean? How they form the idea of Islam? They form the idea of Islam in their family, what being taught by their parents, by the school, by connection, and by experience. And all these elements produce a very strong emotional elements that has a value. And it's there that we have an element like Solomon saying, emotion ascribed responsibility, which is utterly essential to our sense of justice. We do not first ascribe responsibility and then respond emotionally. The emotion itself ascribes responsibility. It mediates, recognize, or simply presume that it harm the heart as a cause. Injustice, in other words, is not just getting the short end, it also requires the somebody to be blamed. Blame, in other big concept, is needed to understand this mass support, often, although sometimes denied, of many young Muslim radicalism, if we want to say so, inverted commas, is much more widespread of what you see on the point of the aspect. Not everybody come up with their own feeling and ideas, but that is the reason. And the other element that is very important that I'm going to touch is about dignity. And if you look at even the Tunisian and party, Rashid Ghannouchi, has claimed Islam has come back to restore dignity to its followers, to deliver them from despotism, to regain usurped legitimacy, to restrict the power of a state and to establish and reinforce the power of a people, the power of civil society. Indignation is what you have. And the indignation doesn't come from a theoretical, theological idea. The Iranian Revolution was not a theological revolution. Khomeini thought it was. The people thought, in my opinion, there was a great liberation for justice and dignity, and that brought an incredible sense of power, of emotional collectivity that has come from that process. Only that the leaders, of course, have a kind of different view, the view of theology. And there is a kind of deconnection between the two elements that is very important. That happened with the Brotherhood in Egypt. So there is a kind of understanding that theology is the way, for intellectual elite, but for the people, of course, the process is rather different. And that produces a very interesting problem, that any form of Islamic, we'll call whatever, governance on, will follow a theology that the people will never understand or perceive. That is the reason why theology or theocracy tend to fail, inevitably, because it tends to more and more become oppressive, since there's not the language within the process of emotion and cognitive opening. Because at the end, what happens is that the ideological element of politics, that based on theology, is different from the kind of the ideology, or if you want to use my name, for example, understanding of theology, that the people as individuals form. And ideology and utopia are two sides of the same coin, and that is definitely true. You cannot have ideology without having utopia. But you cannot have utopia if you don't have a dystopia. And so you need to have a situation where you find yourself in a dystopic situation to imagine yourself in a utopic situation. And that is a very important incongruent element where you have that the utopic element of the leader tend to be the theology, the utopic element of the mass tend to be something different, what I call this emotional Islam. And religion itself, of course, has a great element of utopism there, the best for all humanity. We should not think about Islamic Party, Islamists, even the most radical, as evil people, but rather as people that want to bring something that is good, not just power. The element is that the two ideologies are very different. And one of the elements of this is that the understanding, for example, Taoism. There is only one God, right? Why these elements become, from a theological point, an element that nothing can be superior to God. But certainly, even Khomeini saw himself as a politician with a right to decide that a road should be done in the middle of a field when theologically it was incorrect. They had to go around to build something in the middle of that. The people understand that as there is nobody superior to God, so I do not have to respect the human authority. And this produced continual revolution, even within the Islamic party in power. Because of course, at the end of the day, it's nobody superior to God. You, Muslim Islamic leader, you're not superior to me. And that produced this kind of continued denial of what is the process of, politics in itself. That I found very interesting. Because the continued accusation of shirk, the continued accusation that you don't do what God wants. But at the point, since it becomes a continued element of conflict. So the Islamic party, Islamic government, or whatever you want, as many of any form of strong theocracy, will collapse internally or externally, will not have the kind of stability that the people will find. So at the end, is a big kind of dream that in reality will never work. For a very interesting process that you can see very well if you start from a bottom up, from individual back to the policy, instead of starting from a theological analysis. Thank you very much.